Good morning and welcome to the latest webinar from the Sacred Safe Spaces Ministry of the American Baptist Churches of New Jersey. My name is Reverend Eric Hoheisel. I am an Associate Regional Pastor for ABCNJ and I'll be your host for today. We're excited to welcome back Will DuBois. Did I say that correctly, Will?
DuBois.
DuBois, thank you. He is Prevention Coordinator at the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. And Estelle will be introducing him momentarily, but just a couple of logistical reminders as we begin today. This webinar is being recorded and will eventually be linked to the ABCNJ website so that others can benefit from what we learned today. If questions come up during the presentation, we encourage you to type them in the chat box. And at the end, our presenter will be happy to address any questions that you might have. If for some reason you have a problem or you get bumped off the webinar by your computer, you can go back to the original Zoom link and you should be able to rejoin the webinar in progress. So now I want to turn over the webinar to the ABCNJ Sacred Safe Spaces Coordinator, the Reverend Estelle David, who will introduce our speaker today.
I'd like to welcome everyone. Sacred Safe Spaces was started by American Baptist Churches of New Jersey to begin to equip our faith leaders in addressing a serious social problem that exists. 1 in 3 women are victims, 1 in 7 men are victims of domestic violence. And we're finding out today from Will DuBois, what can men do? What is it, many times we look at men as the abusers because of the frequency with women being victims, but there are other things that we can do as the church, as our community, to prevent domestic violence. And I'd like to turn it over to Will and he can talk about it a little more. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Pastor Eric. Thank you, Reverend Estelle. I'm so excited to be here this morning with you. I'm not going to take a whole lot of time for introductions of myself because I've been introduced and you can find out more about me. We can certainly connect offline and have conversations either through email or by phone. So I'm going to jump right into our presentation today. I'm going to share my screen and we are going to jump in and get started here. So let's find my screen. Let's do this. Give me one moment here. Folks, you have to love technology. So give me just 1 second here. Let's do this. Okay. Let me share my screen. All right, here we go. Share computer sound. Okay. Okay, so good morning. Once again, my name is Will DuBois. I'm from the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. The presentation today is titled "A Call to Men." The goal of our workshop today is that we're going to look at a video by Tony Porter, who is one of the co-founders of the organization A Call to Men. So I want to be I don't want to get confused today. I am not from A Call to Men. I'm from the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. The title of our presentation today is called A Call to Men, but the organization that Tony works for or has founded is called A Call to Men. So I hope you got that. I hope that was clear as mud. Just kidding, but I just wanted to make sure that I am not an employee of A Call to Men, the organization. I am strictly or merely just putting out a call to men to take on a larger role in the work to end domestic violence. So we're going to let Tony Porter speak today. We're going to take a deeper dive into what we call the collective socialization of man. We're going to have a call to action, and then I'm going to provide you with an opportunity of how to get involved. So we're going to watch a video by Tony Porter. This is a TED talk that he had done, and it's pretty powerful. It talks a lot about the collective socialization of man, and I just thought that it would make more sense for Tony to speak and to really kind of lay out the foundation for what we're going to be looking at today. So just give me a moment. I have this queued up, and we're going to watch this. All right, so here we go. Let me just make sure the sound is good. Okay.
So I grew up in New York City, between Harlem and the Bronx. Growing up as a boy, we was taught that men had to be tough, had to be strong, had to be courageous, dominating, no pain, no emotions, with the exception of anger and definitely no fear. That men are in charge, which means women are not. That men lead, and you should just follow and just do what we say. That men are superior, women are inferior. That men are strong, women are weak. That women are of less value, property of men, and objects, particularly sexual objects. I've later come to know that to be the collective socialization of men, better known as the man box. See, this man box has in it all the ingredients of how we define what it means to be a man. Now, I also want to say, without a doubt, there are some wonderful, wonderful, absolutely wonderful things about being a man. Well, at the same time, there's some stuff that's just straight up twisted. And we really need to begin to challenge, look at it, and really get in the process of deconstructing, redefining what we come to know as manhood. This is my two at home, Kendall and Jade. They're 11 and 12. Kendall's 15 months older than Jade. There's a period of time, when my wife, her name is Tammy, and we just got real busy, and whip it, bit, bam, boom, Kendall and Jade. Right? And when they were about 5 and 6, 4 and 5, Jade could come to me. It didn't matter, come to me crying, It didn't matter what she was crying about. She can get on my knee, she can snot my sleeve up, just cry it out. Daddy got you, that's all that's important. Now Kendall, on the other hand, and like I said, he's only 15 months older than her, he come to me crying. It's like soon as I would hear him crying, a clock would go off. I would give the boy probably about 30 seconds, which means by the time he got to me, I was already saying things like, why you crying? Hold your head up, look at me, explain to me what's wrong, tell me what's wrong, I can't understand you while you're crying. And out of my own frustration of my role and responsibility of building him up as a man to fit into these guidelines and these structures that are defining this man box, I would find myself saying things like, just go in your room. Just go on in your room, sit down, get yourself together, and come back and talk to me when you could talk to me like a what? Like a man. And he's 5 years old. And as I grow in life, I would say to myself, my God, what's wrong with me? What am I doing, Why would I do this? And I think back to my father. There was a time in my life where we had a very troubled experience in our family. My brother Henry, he died tragically when we was teenagers. We lived in New York City, as I said, we lived in the Bronx at the time. And the burial was a place called Long Island. It was about 2 hours outside of the city. And as we were preparing to come back from the burial, the cars stopped at the bathroom, to let folks take care of themselves for the long ride back to the city. And the limousine empties out. My mother, my sister, my auntie, they all get out, but my father and I stayed in the limousine. And no sooner than the women got out, he burst out crying. He didn't want to cry in front of me, but he knew he wasn't going to make it back to the city. It was better me than to allow himself to express these feelings and emotions in front of the women. And this is a man who 10 minutes ago had just put his teenage son in the ground. Something I just can't even imagine. The thing that sticks with me the most is that he was apologizing to me for crying in front of me. And at the same time, he was also giving me props, lifting me up for not crying. You know, I come to also look at this as this fear that we have as men, this fear that just have us paralyzed, holding us hostage to this man box. I can remember speaking to a 12-year-old boy, a football player, and I asked him, I said, how would you feel if in front of all the players, your coach told you you were playing like a girl? Now, I expected him to say something like, I'll be sad, I'll be mad, I'll be angry, or something like that. No, the boy said to me, it would destroy me. And I said to myself, God, if it would destroy him to be called a girl, what are we then teaching him about girls? It took me back to a time when I was about 12 years old. I grew up in tenement buildings, you know, in the inner city, and at this time we're living in the Bronx. And in the building next to where I lived, there was a guy named Johnny. He was about 16 years old, and we were all about 12 years old, younger guys, and he was hanging out with all us younger guys. And this guy, he was up to a lot of no good. He was the kind of kid where parents would have to wonder, what is this 16-year-old boy doing with these 12-year-old boys? And he did spend a lot of time up to no good. He was a troubled kid. You know, his mother had died from a heroin overdose. He was being raised by his grandmother. His father wasn't on the set. His grandmother had 2 jobs. He was home alone a lot. But I gotta tell you, we young guys, we looked up to this dude, man. He was cool. He was fine. That's what his sister said. He was fine, right? He was having sex. You know, we all looked up to him. So one day I'm out in front of the house doing something, just playing around, doing something, I don't know what. He looks out his window, he calls me upstairs. He said, hey, Amp, they called me Anthony growing up as a kid. Hey, Anthony, come on upstairs. Johnny called, you go. So I run right upstairs. As he opens the door, he says to me, do you want some? Now, I immediately knew what he meant, because for me growing up at that time and our relationship with this man box, do you want some meant one or two things, sex or drugs. And we weren't doing drugs. Now, my box, my card, my man box card was immediately in jeopardy. 2 things. One, I never had sex. We don't talk about that as men. You only tell your dearest, closest friends, sworn to secrecy for life, the first time you had sex. For everybody else, we go around like we've been having sex since we was 2. There ain't no first time. The other thing I couldn't tell them is that I didn't want any. You know, that's even worse. We're supposed to always be on the prowl. Women are objects, especially sexual objects. So anyway, I couldn't tell him any of that. So like my mother would say, make a long story short, I just simply said to Johnny, yes. He told me go in his room. I go in his room, on his bed is a girl from the neighborhood named Sheila. She's 16 years old, she's nude. She is what I know today to be mentally ill, higher functioning at times than others. We had a whole choice worth, you know, inappropriate names for her. Anyway, Johnny had just gotten through having sex with her. Well, he actually raped her, but he would say he had sex with her because while Sheila never said no, she also never said yes. So he was offering me the opportunity to do the same. So when I go in the room, I close the door. Folks, I'm petrified. I stand with my back to the door so Johnny can't bust in the room and see that I'm not doing anything. And I stand there long enough that I could have actually done something. So now I'm no longer trying to figure out what I'm gonna do. I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna get out of this room. So in my 12 years of wisdom, I zip my pants down, I walk out into the living room, and lo and behold to me, while I was in the room with Sheila, Johnny was back at the window calling guys up. So now it's a living room full of guys, like, you know, like the waiting room in the doctor's office. And they asked me, how was it? And I say to them, it was good. And I zip my pants up in front of them, and I head for the door. Now, I say this all with remorse, and I was feeling a tremendous amount of remorse at that time, but I was conflicting, because while I was feeling remorse, I was excited, because I didn't get caught, but I knew I felt bad about what was happening. This fear of getting outside the man box totally enveloped me. It was way more important to me about me and my man box card than about Sheila and what was happening to her. See, collectively, we as men are taught to have less value in women, to view them as property and the objects of men. We see that as an equation that equals violence against women. We as men, good men, the large majority of men, we operate on the foundation of this whole collective socialization. We kind of see ourselves separate, but we're very much a part of it. You see, we have to come to understand that less value, property, and objectification is the foundation, and the violence can't happen without it. So we're very much a part of the solution as well as the problem. The Centers for Disease Control says that men's violence against women is at epidemic proportions. It's the #1 health concern for women in this country and abroad. So quickly, I'd like to just say, you know, this is my love of my life, my daughter Jade. The world I envision for her. How do I want men to be acting and behaving? I need you on board. I need you with me. I need you working with me and me working with you on how we raise our sons and teach them to be men. That it's okay to not be dominating. That it's okay to have feelings and emotions. That it's okay to promote equality. That it's okay to have women who are just friends and that's it. That it's okay to be whole. That my liberation as a man is tied to your liberation as a woman. I remember asking a 9-year-old boy, what would life be like for you if you didn't have to adhere to this man box? He said to me, I would be free. Thank you, folks.
All right, that was Mr. Tony Porter talking about the man box, and I love that. I love that TED talk because it really, what it does is it really breaks down the collective socialization of man. And so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here, and we're going to take a deeper dive into what Tony had spoken about. So if we look at this, just speaking about it, and this is taken from A Call to Men's material. It says, for the past 40 years, women have been at the forefront of this movement to end domestic violence and sexual assault. It says, you know, during this period of time, a tremendous amount of work has been done. There have been numerous accomplishments made to include new laws on the books to protect those who have been victimized and hold offenders accountable for domestic violence and sexual assault. It says, and if we are to speak specifically of men's violence against women, we would say that more men are being held accountable today than ever before. While this is true, if we ask domestic violence and sexual violence advocates, they will tell you that the sad truth is that violence has not declined. And I want you to pay close attention to that, because it's not to say that women who have been doing this work for so many years have not done a good job. So, you know, the movement started 40 years ago. Women have done a tremendous work. You know, like it says there's been books that have, you know, laws on the books to, you know, to help advocate for victims of domestic violence. You know, there's been, you know, they do distinguish between a domestic violence agency or coalition and a sexual assault coalition. So there's all this work that's been done. But here's the issue. Here's the reality. And as is stated here, it says, if you ask domestic and sexual violence advocates, they will tell you that the sad truth is that violence has not declined. It's time for that we begin to focus on preventing the violence. And so that's another key word, is prevention. That's where the required social change we are seeking will be found. In order to prevent the violence, men, I'll say it again, men must become part of the solution. The involvement of those who identify as male as part of the solution will require them to examine the norms that define manhood and redefine the aspects that support men's violence against all women. Okay, so what are we getting at here? There's a couple of things I want to talk about. So when we talk about prevention, prevention is, you know, our society is very reactive. You know, we create programs and we create resources after something has happened. We don't do a good job at doing things before things happen. And so, you know, I say for me, my own little mantra or my own little slogan is, the best reaction is proaction. And what that means is that I think we've learned enough that you know, history is repetitive. It repeats itself, and the only way we're going to really create the change that we're looking for pardon me, is to really get in front of issues. And so preventing violence is really where it's at. Now, let's pull another piece out of this. It says men must become part of the solution. So as we mentioned in the previous slide, that for 40 years, women have been at the forefront of this work. Men, this is a male issue, and men have to become part of the solution in order for it to really change. It says, we have to examine our norms. And so when we're talking about examining the norms, we're going to jump into what we call the man box. And the man box, as Tony had mentioned in the TED Talk, is really, how we're socialized. We're socialized to, not to cry, not to show weakness, to always demonstrate power and control, aggression and dominance, be protective, don't act like a woman. We have to be, it's being heterosexual. Don't act like a gay man. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because I want to dig down a little bit deeper. Tough, athletic, strong, courageous, makes decisions, doesn't need any help at all, and views women as properties or objectifies them. So when we talk about these in the middle in particular, and I'm moving kind of fast because I want to be mindful of time. When we talk about these in particular, any sort of femininity that's shown by a man is really unacceptable when you're talking about the man box. Now, I know I'm speaking to the body of Christ, and there's certain, God's word is very clear about the responses that we should be in terms of gender. God is very clear; His word is very clear about that, and so I'm not promoting anything that's contrary to God's word. But what I'm saying here is in the man box, if a man is not hypersensitive, hyper masculine, and he shows any sort of sensitivity, it's not found in this man box. And so that man is frowned upon, or he's not, he's not looked upon as, as being, all male. He could be, suspect, or, there might be some, some idea that he's less of a man because he's not exhibiting all of these traits that's in the man box. I've played a lot of sports in my life, and I've seen this very thing play out in a lot of different scenarios. I myself, I was raised as a man. I was raised, very much as with man box behavior, but I didn't always fall in the box because I was raised by a single mom. So with my dad there at different times. And so for me, seeing my mom go through things and learning how to express emotions at times, when, there were times when feelings would overcome me and I would cry about things, or I would be emotional about things. And I did it in secret because it wasn't what boys or what young men are taught to do. So this man box behavior really creates a hierarchy within men. You have your alpha male, which is the complete dominant, the man who is always like the aggressor, who's in control, who's in charge, who has it all together. And then you have, your average male who is just, who's just surviving, just living, still operating in the man box. But what happens is that hierarchy begins to isolate because the alpha male is seen as the man's man. Everybody wants to be that alpha male, but everybody's not an alpha male. And there's nothing wrong with being the alpha male. But what the point that I'm trying to make is that this man box creates limitations. What it does is it begins to create a hierarchy within our own gender. But what it does is it nurtures the devaluing women. So that's what it does. It nurtures them, because if you're seen as a woman, or you're less than because you're acting like a woman, then what are you saying about women, as Tony said? And not to be redundant, but that's just the point of emphasis, is that the man box perpetuates this sense of devaluing women, to the point where you're looking at how we're socialized. You see women as less than, you see them as property, you see them as they're objectified, and then which equals violence against women. And so because they're less value, because they're seen as property and they're only a sexual object, then they have they're not seen as equal. You know, they're seen as less than. And so it's easy to you know, for a man who sees a woman as less than to assault her. You know, if she's not following the rules or she's not complying with behaviors that that he sees as acceptable, if she's not following the rules, it just makes it easier for him to slap her or to grab her or to berate her with, you know, with harsh language or speak down to her. It just makes it that much easier because of these factors that we're talking about here. Is that the collective socialization of man sees from an early age, sees women as less than. And then, you know, as they continue to grow and get in relationships, it sees them as property. And then even in that further growth, when we're talking about, you know, coming into adolescence, you see how the property and the objectification becomes one together. And then what happens is that, you know, you have these young adolescent males beginning to get into these relationships with these adolescent females, and women are socialized in a certain way as well too. And we're not going to talk about that, we're just talking about men right now. But in that socialization, they begin to play out these things in these relationships. And then you see at an early age that, you know, right now, if you're looking at statistics, you know, teen dating violence is a very, very real issue now. So it's not just domestic violence when we see it from a lens of, you know, two married adults, two adults in a dating relationship. You know, just looking at it, we can't just look at it from that lens anymore. We have to look at it from adolescence, and we're talking, you know, from the, you know, the earliest onset of a dating relationship. We see that there's issues surrounding this very subject of how males are socialized and how it's beginning to play out from the early onset. So this is a very, very key issue. It's a very important issue. It's one not to be nixed off or pretending to that it doesn't exist. You know, we as men, and I speak for men, not all men, but I speak as a man, that there are certain ways that we are socialized that are just wrong and they're just unhealthy. You know, and I've worked with men for, you know, 16 years. My whole career in this work has been, you know, with men. I worked with young boys when I first started out in social work. Young boys coming out of what they call the juvenile detention center or the training school. And I saw the socialization and what happened when they were socialized in their homes. And then once they went off to juvenile detention, what the socialization looked like within the confines of those walls, and how they began to redefine themselves. And some young boys that went in kind of timid came out these for lack of better words, these hyper masculine almost monsters, because this is what they felt as though they needed to do. And it was really an unhealthy recipe for socialization. If we take a look at this really quickly, it kind of gives you, so Tony had showed this on the slide and he had kind of clicked through it. And, you know, that video was back in 2010, where, you know, that was 10 years ago. 2020, they have a better visual for us today. And as we see at the foundation of it, the collective socialization of man is the foundation piece, right? And then as we see this connection as it continues to evolve. It continues to evolve into violence against women. And there's an evolution of sexual assault, domestic violence assault. And then we see, you know, dating violence, you know, rape, stalking. And then we see porn and harassment. Now, if we can take it either way, but at the bottom of it, at the foundation of it, is the collective socialization of man. And so you see how all of these issues are encompassed in this subject. You see that the way that we are socialized, you know, as men really, really, really plays a part into how we relate in life and how we look at things and how we do things. Just want to speak on, you know, a couple of things really quickly. When we talk about dating violence, once again, you know, that starts early. If we're not socialized right, if we're not looking at relationships and taught to look at relationships in a healthy way, then we're going to start out our young relationships in an unhealthy manner. Pornography is a huge issue. It's not just an issue of an issue within the church, talking about it being unholy, or it's further than that. It's obviously something that God doesn't it's not pleasing to him, obviously. But more so from a sociological standpoint, what it does is the constant taking in, or the constant visualizing pornographic material begins to devalue women. They become just this sexual object. They become this thing, and it begins to shift attitudes and beliefs, and it changes your orientation about how you perceive women to be. And then it further just allows for this objectification to happen, which then makes it that much easier to have violence against someone who you don't see as anything as but a means to an end. There's no value in that woman anymore, because she's been objectified through the visual of watching pornography consistently. So there's studies that have been done. If you want to dig a little bit more, if you want to say, oh, this guy Will, he's crazy, like he's just, he's being, he's taking this overboard. No, I'm not. You can certainly find this information on the internet. You can definitely do some research to find, there's been studies, psychological studies that have been done that definitely show that the constant, absorption, mental absorption, or the constant, watching of pornographic material is a huge starting point or entry point for the devaluing of women. All right, so let me move on. So what can you do? So you say, all right, well, Will, you're telling me all this information. What can I do? Well, you can be an agent of change. And an agent of change which is defined as someone who promotes and enables change to happen. You can start playing a part in you can't change the world, but you can change the world your little world that you're a part of. Okay. And how you can do that is by getting involved. And the way that you get involved is first of all, examining yourself and saying, you know what, can I get involved? Do I have the time? Do I have the desire? Do I have the really, am I hungry to do this? And, you find yourself answering those questions a lot of times, and you find yourself saying yes, but then it's like, what do I do? Okay, yes, I'm hungry. I have the time, and I really have the passion, and I really want to do this, but how do I get involved? And so I'm glad that you asked that. So you can get involved with us. So this is an initiative that I lead in the state of New Jersey, and I'm not gonna take time to read through this whole thing, but really what it is because some of this I've already covered, particularly with the collective socialization. But the Men of Courage is seeking to rewrite that narrative. It's seeking to rewrite the narrative that by changing the landscape of toxic male culture to one which is healthy. We want to interrupt the generations of bondage and oppression this toxic culture has created. We believe that engaging young men and boys as allies in the work to end domestic violence will be one key to creating healthier New Jersey communities for now and for generations to come. So the coalition has started this initiative back in 2018, a couple months before I even came on. I came on in 2018. And this initiative really is trying to engage men. It's trying to engage men men and young boys as allies in the work to end domestic violence. And so this Men of Courage network that I'm creating is I'm trying to bring men together, trying to connect men and organizations and churches to this larger network of people that are doing this work. A lot of times in New Jersey, what I found, over the time of the course of time that I've been here, is that New Jersey is very siloed. There's a lot of work happening, but it's happening in pockets. It's happening, in North Jersey, it's Central Jersey, Southern Jersey, but Central Jersey doesn't know what Southern Jersey is doing. Southern Jersey doesn't know what Northern Jersey is doing. And none of them know what each other's doing collectively. So we want to bridge those gaps. We want to make sure that people have a larger network they're connected to. And so this is what the Men of Courage is a vehicle for that. So the 5 core values is, I'm not going to read through each one of them, but I'm going to say, the 5 core values are: they're survivor centered, healing is a right, not a privilege, everyone has equity, we are community, and be the change. And there's one that I want to focus on right here, really quickly, is that healing is not a right, is a privilege. We believe that all men, including those men who have caused harm, have the right to have safe spaces to heal from their trauma. And the reason why I wanted to point that one out is that oftentimes, as Reverend Estelle had mentioned in the intro, is that we look as men as the perpetrators. And yes, if you looked at the Uniform Crime Report, which is taken, which is the conglomeration of all police reports and of incidences that have happened throughout the state of New Jersey. If you take a look at that crime report, the Uniform Crime Report, or the UCR, as we know it in this work, you would see that it's 95, 96, it's hovering in the high 90s, 98% male on female. Okay, let's just say it's 95% male on female. All right, which is real. So these are police responses to incidences of domestic violence within households. But just because it's 95% male on female doesn't mean that that man who is perpetrating that particular incident or act of domestic violence isn't a broken individual himself. Okay, and so a lot of times these broken individuals are congregants in your churches that you're sitting in. They could be sitting right next to you and you not know it. That broken individual could be looking for the peace and the solace of Christ in his life, and we don't have that opportunity to really engage with him because we may have heard, there's whispers in the foyer of, oh, that person over there and that family engages in domestic violence or this and that. And then there's this stigma that's put upon them where we embrace the women, who's engaged, who was the victim, but then we look at the man as something different, and then we kind of push him to the side, and then he's looked at or treated differently. And then what happens a lot of times, in my experience, is that the man stops coming to church, the woman continues to come to church, she flourishes, and he declines, or he diminishes, and he just falls away from the Lord. I think that we as the body of Christ have an opportunity to really engage with that man, okay, embrace the woman, of course, lift her up and empower her, but really help that man find some accountability and find healing for himself, because of maybe he has traumas. Doing this work for 15, 16 years, I can honestly say that the majority of men that have walked through the doors that I have sat down and done assessments or interviewed have either been 95% have either been victims or witnesses of abuse themselves. So, I mean, when we talk about this, I mean, we're particularly from the lens of being believers, it's our duty to really, be that older brother, to be the not to be the older brother, but to be the father in the story of the prodigal son, to be the father who welcomes back the son that was living a wayward life and was off kind of running amok. The father didn't, when he saw the son at a distance, he welcomed the son in. He even said, hey, listen, cut the fatted calf, and listen, we're going to have a celebration because my son has returned home. And a lot of times we as believers, we are so judgmental, and we want to take this stance of how we should be treating other people when God doesn't treat us that way. Now, I'm not going to start preaching, but I just wanted to make sure that I make that point about everybody has a right to heal. Everybody has a right to have an opportunity to change. Regardless of what they've done, they still have that opportunity. And particularly us who are called believers, we have that obligation to really be that father who receives back the younger brother who was off living this, or the younger son who was off living this life. Okay, I'm done preaching. So moving on. How you can get involved, and this brings me to the end of my presentation, and because we're just about at time, but how you can get involved, you can contact me at the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. Once again, I just put up my initiative that I'm working on, is the New Jersey Men of Courage, which is under the umbrella of the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. That is my contact information. And I believe if I click one more time, yes, there's my email. Please feel free to reach out to me if you want to get involved. I can help you navigate through the access points. There's certain things that you should be getting involved with first before you get to maybe to be involved with certain aspects I have, because I want to help you build your foundation properly. But nonetheless, there are opportunities, and I want to help you navigate through those access points. So today was just an opportunity to kind of whet your appetite, to see what it is that you see, if you're interested, to give you some information to help you open your eyes and see the subject matter from a different lens. And I hope that I hope that I did that for you. And once again, thank you so much for your time. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me either by phone or by email. Thank you all.
Will, first of all, thank you. I did have both a question and a comment, if I may.
Sure.
The first question is that it occurred to me that perhaps there, and I'm curious, and there may be no way to track this kind of statistic down, but I can't help but wonder if there is underreporting in violence against men precisely because of the man box that doesn't want to admit that they may be a victim. So I don't know that there's any way to prove that, but it was something intriguing. I'm sure you've thought about this.
Yeah, it's and that's a great question. In all the years that I've been doing this work, we'll never say that a woman can't be violent. We do caution, though. We do caution to say that a lot of times when there's violence exhibited by a woman, we always encourage an investigation to be done, because a lot of times you'll see that the violence that was exhibited by that woman was in an effort to fight back against the man, or maybe she's come to her breaking point. But even with that being said, there are women who can be abusive towards their partners with no underlying issues, but just besides the fact that just the roles are reversed. Mm-hmm. And yes, so I have heard men say, "Oh, you know what? I'm not called because I'm a man. What do I look like calling the police on my child's mother, or what do I look like calling the police on my girlfriend?" So there is that stigma, and it all falls in that man box. It definitely does. It falls in that man box. And so that's a very real thing. I don't believe that it's tracked, and it's kind of very hard to tease out, because you have a lot of guys who have been identified as the perpetrators, presenting that information. So it could be a little bit of propaganda. So you have to kind of be careful. But to your point, I do believe that there are women who are violent against men. And there is, because of that man box socialization, reluctant to make any call against their partners.
Yeah, and with regard to that man box, and this was just a comment that I wanted to add, I noticed in that kind of pyramid shape that you showed with the collective socialization of men at the bottom, I noticed that pornography was at the top. And I would almost make an argument that pornography belongs in the man box and is part of that collective socialization that leads to the objectification. And I would argue that pornography would be in the bottom, the foundational box, rather than a result later at the end. I think it's a contributor to the objectification and the violence that happens. And so that was just my observation, that I think that might belong lower in the pyramid.
Yeah, and and that's a great point. That when you look at that, and Tony will say this, it's not an absolute. So it can kind of, depending on the person or depending on the socialization of the individual, it could work. It doesn't have to be sequential, is what I'm saying. It really, if he kind of pulls it out, and I've heard him say this, he pulls it out just so that it's a visual, so that it can be seen, but it's all jumbled in there, because that socialization, how we how we're taught, when we talk about that, really lends to any of those things happening at any different time, not in particular sequence or combination of, but nonetheless, it just, that socialization lends to that. It doesn't lend for us to, to really see, to see women as equals. I mean, it's even something as little as like, playing sports. The worst thing you could say to a little boy is what? Stop throwing the ball. You're not throwing the ball hard enough. You're throwing like a what?
Right. Like a girl.
Like a girl. You're throwing like a girl. So you're teaching that young boy at that age that I don't want to be looked at like a girl. Right. So now we're trying to disassociate ourselves from the experiences of young women and girls, and now they become less than in us, and we want to make sure that we never have anything to do with girls at all, let alone act like a girl or throw a ball like a girl. So then that devaluing starts taking place in that instance.
Will, this has been terrific. I just want to invite Estelle back in to see if there are any additional questions before we start to wrap things up today. Also, I wanted to ask Estelle, will we have a webinar on December 12th or not? Do we know yet?
We don't know.
Okay, all right. So we're waiting. There will be information on our website concerning that final webinar, but all of these again will be available on our website. And I want to begin, and I'll let Estelle close us, but I want to begin by thanking you again, Will, for an excellent presentation. Just God bless you as you continue your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Will and all those who watch these webinars in hope that we will inspire you to do something. This is a call to action for everyone. There's so much trouble in our world and in our churches and in our families. And we, the church, can be the leader of resolving those problems. I believe that with all my heart, and try to encourage you to do something. So I hope that these webinars have whetted your taste to know something about what you can do. And we can't do everything, but we can do something. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you again. And I'll just put this final pitch out to any men in churches that might be watching this. If your men's ministry is interested in having Will come, I'm sure that he would be more than happy to share resources or perhaps give a presentation to your men's group. I want to make sure that you take advantage of his expertise and his heart, which we all really appreciate. So thank you again.
Thank you, Will.
And God bless.
God bless you.